Hi, good morning, and welcome to Scrubs and Stethoscopes, the Nursing Handbook. I'm your host, Kathryn Watson, with Educational Nurse, and my co-host, Ashley Roberts, is here. And we're going to be talking about charge nurse. So we're going back and forth, and one of the things is what is the overall, could you describe like the primary responsibilities of a charge nurse?
So I think one of the primary things is the flow of the unit. You need to make sure things are working. A lot of that is bed assignments. People are getting discharged. Who's going to be discharged first? Who's getting admitted? Do they need a specific type of bed for their admission? Is this a floor where there's 2 patients per room? Because then you have to look at males and females. Are they on precautions? Things like that. And so it does get a bit complicated. And some places, when you're a charge nurse, you also have a full assignment. So it depends on that, what your flow is really going to look like.
Yeah, if you are a charge nurse, you are supposed to have one less patient. But if you don't, you have to balance that out. But one of the things of being a charge nurse is checking in with all the other nurses.
Yeah.
And as Ashley was stating, that you have to see where everybody is. So one of the tips I like to give out to some nurses who haven't been a charge nurse is I turn around and I get a list of all the nurses and I go through how many patients they have and how many patients may be potential for discharge. Because I turn around and if there's beds that are open, I write all those down then I try to keep them on a piece of paper with me because you will be working closely either with the nurse manager or the nursing supervisor. And they'll ask you how many beds you have, where you are, where you have discharges or anything. Because during the daytime, it's sometimes hard to tell if you're going to have your patients be discharged by the end of the day or not. Sadly, 3 to 11 and usually 3 to 7 is the busiest times for all the patients, especially the patients who are going to a rehab facility. They all want them there by 5 o'clock. So that's why I always say you write them down on a piece of paper. So your patient's number. So let's just say your nurse has 5 patients or 4, and they're going to be going down to 2 or going down to 3 and where they are on their list. I usually like to check in with these nurses and ask like about a couple hours into the shift so they can have an idea where they are because we need to wait for them to be able to assess all their patients and then kind of check in with them. 2, if you have your assignment, the new thing is they're trying to have a nurse without an assignment.
Yeah.
But if you have an assignment and you're busy, I do like to communicate with the secretary because the secretary is the one who usually answers the phone. And she can actually communicate with the nursing supervisor stating that, like, this is where we are. Then I make a list to say 1, 2, 3, like, hey, you're going to be the first one to get an admission. So that nurse is aware that she's going to be getting, or he is going to be getting an admission at a certain time and saying, you're good, you're not good. Because if they're not good, you don't want to overload them.
Yeah.
So I sit there and to it, if you're in a room, the secretary can turn around. If you give them the list to say, hey, number 2, they can turn around and go to that nurse and say, hey, you're up next for the admission. And not even that, I like to touch base with all of them because I feel like the biggest complaint, I don't know if you ever got the biggest complaint, is that I didn't know I was getting an admission.
Yep.
They turn around and
I feel like you should expect an admission, but yes, it is about communication. I think in nursing in general, it's very important to be organized, but when you're a charge nurse, that becomes even more important. You really have to know what's going on, what could potentially be coming, and where you stand across the floor.
Right. A lot of it has to know too is if there's a patient who, let's just say they have dementia or something and they're wandering, or you have a patient who could be very aggressive, or even family members.
Yeah.
Because sometimes those nurses will sit there and try to de-escalate the situation, but sometimes you get those patients or family members who are like, I want to speak to the charge nurse.
Yeah.
And you can feel very intimidating when you have to go into the room. But this is all about like non-body language. So you go in there. I usually say, act like you're the charge nurse and bring a clipboard. I usually bring the clipboard that has the nursing assignments on it, because sometimes you'll get report about what the floor is about so you can have an idea
Yeah,
of
true.
what's going on. And I like to go in with a clipboard or something, because for some reason you holding a clipboard or holding something in your hand, you look more like an authoritative person instead of just walking in going, hey, I'm the charge nurse,
Yeah.
especially if you're kind of young. Because you get the 20-year-olds who they're like, you look like you're a baby. How can you be in charge? You know, and then it's just a lot, like we were talking about communication in another podcast, is just listening to
Mhm.
what the person has to say, and then acknowledging them that they're like, I'm upset about something, and then trying to, hey, if we can't come to a resolution with this, then it is talking about getting the nursing supervisor
Yeah.
involved. If you can't de-escalate the situation, 9 times out of 10 it's miscommunication somewhere,
Yeah.
is what I noticed. I know we talked about challenges, so like how do you handle if like you're short staffed?
Oh, that's really hard. And it depends on if you're on a floor that has set ratios. Like on the PCU, you can only be assigned 3 patients. Well, if you're down a nurse, that can be challenging. And then it puts strain on the tele beds that can take up to 5. Um, I think it really requires teamwork in that case when you're short staffed. You hope you have your aides, enough aides, maybe even an extra aide when you're down a nurse. You try your best to split up the patients so that each nurse maybe only gets one heavy patient. Um, but when everything you've done isn't working, you have to just come together and function as a team for the safety of the patients.
Yes, yeah, I agree, trying to work as a team. That's why we say that communication with everybody and kind of checking in.
Yeah.
Something that I noticed that kind of comes up with me, and I don't know if you experienced it, is that patients who are discharged. So I've had, like, I was working the 12, so this is like after hours from like the 3 to 7 part. A
Yeah.
patient was discharged, and then they call and they say, my prescription's not at the pharmacy.
Mhm.
I don't know if you ever experienced that
Yeah.
before. How did you handle that situation?
Oh gosh, I think that I probably paged whoever, the cross coverage and hope that they could help me. I don't really remember, to be honest, but I know that things like that happen. And it, like you said, it always happens when everyone else has gone home for the day during that 3 to 7 or even after. And it again, you go into that teamwork. You have to, we can't write scripts. So we have to discuss it with one of the providers in house and try to work with them to see how we can help this patient so that patient doesn't end up back in the ER.
Right. One of my biggest things, that this is where I talk about documentation.
Yeah.
Anytime you talk to a family member or anybody calls you and talks to you as the charge nurse, you need to go into the chart and document it.
Yeah.
I always document the conversations that I have, because like one experience that I had is that we did discharge this patient to a facility. So then they call and ask about the paperwork and clarification about some certain meds or certain things or whatever. And it's very important that you make sure that you document it, because if something happens to the patient while they're at the other facility, you can be held liable for whatever happens in between, because remember, it's hospital to going to another facility, who's liable. So
Yeah.
sit there and document that you had a conversation with whoever, and if you can get names, that is very important, that I wanted to add there. And that's why documentation, that no matter who you're talking to, and if you can get quotes, you quote and you write it down.
Yeah.
Is there any like essential like skills that someone needs to have as a charge nurse?
Well, one thing I noticed that's being offered more recently is a charge nurse class. And so if your hospital offers that, I really would take advantage of it. Um, at the end of the day, I think a lot of us, I think the majority of us weren't given that chance to take a class like that. And we learned, by watching our peers do it.
Yeah.
So I think I think the main thing is knowing how to act like a leader, and you're juggling wanting to make your friends or coworkers happy and wanting to keep a safe environment. And obviously safety comes first in that juggle. But we also want to be happy and work as a team and have a good shift together. So I think that balance and that leadership ability are very important, but also can be very challenging. So that's why I would have loved the opportunity as a new nurse to take a course like the Charge Nurse course.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of funny. I
Yeah.
think I was a charge nurse at another hospital when I went to the newer hospital I was working at. And then I was like a charge nurse for almost over a year or so. And they're like, oh, you're mandated to take this
Yeah.
class. And you're like, what? I think it's more for legal things on their side to say to document that you took the class and you're
Yeah, probably.
qualified. But like, talk about qualifications. I mean, do you have any experiences? Like, I know you were a float nurse at one point, and were you ever put in a situation like that?
Yeah. So as a float nurse, you shouldn't be in charge, and you most often aren't training anyone either. And there was a 3 to 11 shift. I got floated to a floor that I used to work on, and a floor that there's been a lot of change on. So every single nurse I was working with was a new nurse. And me as a float nurse, I was charged and I was training someone. And it was very intimidating because even though back in the day it was my floor, it's not my floor anymore. And so not only am I in charge, I'm training this other nurse, and I'm like, oh my God. And I mean, I did it. I got through it. I don't know if it was the best choice, but I don't know. It's one of those things in nursing. Sometimes you just do what you feel like you need to. Now that I'm a more experienced nurse, I may have put my foot down and said I will either be in charge or train. I think it was probably too much to ask me to do both. Um,
I would definitely agree with that. I mean, it's like one or the other, not
yeah,
both. And
yeah,
I don't understand why it's like management sometimes feels like it's okay to
yeah,
be like, hey, we need you. You're the most inured, so this is what we're going to do. It's like,
yeah,
no, this is not what we're going to do. And then we feel so obligated to say yes all the time. So this is where the biggest thing of developing skills as a leader, it's sticking up and saying, no, this is not safe.
yeah,
Because that's one of the biggest things with today, that they'll put more and more and more on you if you're just that passive person and you say,
yeah.
yeah, sure, sure, sure. And you're inside drowning.
Mhm.
And then that's why I think nurses are getting burnt out, is
Yeah,
because like you're taking on more than you should. And
exactly.
and it's your license. So
Mhm.
it's okay to sit there and say, no, this is not okay. This is not what we're doing.
Yeah,
Because it's a license. You can refuse an assignment. You can't take an assignment and then refuse it or walk away, because then that becomes patient abandonment. But in the beginning of the shift, it's okay to say, this is not working because this is not safe.
yeah.
You know?
And likewise, I mean, I was still pretty new as a nurse at that time, but I should have stood up and said no. But you also can stand up and not necessarily say no to the nursing supervisor, but have a conversation about patient safety. You know, if your floor just got slammed with admissions and now there's another patient waiting in the ED to be admitted, and oh, we have an open bed, but we're drowning. I think you have to be confident to say, no, we can't do that right now. Can we talk about how we can make this safe? Can we talk about a different way to do this? Is there another floor? I know that they have not very many beds, but maybe they have more nurses. Could they possibly take this patient and have a discussion, have open communication with the nursing supervisor in an effort to promote that patient safety?
Yes, I very much agree with the communication with the nursing supervisors, because my whole thing is, if you don't speak up, that's in general with life anyways, that if you don't speak up, because like, it's like sometimes people assume like people are mind readers or something, and
Yeah.
you are just supposed to know. You see my face, you see my face. It's all upset. It's like, no, 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 no. People don't read. Like, you can read body language and know, but it might just be like you're intimidated in the situation or something.
Yeah.
But you need to use your words and say, like, this is the safe. And we always say evidence-based practice. So it's like speaking up to say, this nurse is dealing with this nurse is dealing with that, this nurse is dealing with this, blah, 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 and take it, the plan. 2 is saying, fine, can you push this off to another shift? You will and might get the pushback because emergency room nurses are like, you have no idea what we're dealing with down here. And it becomes this conflict between the ED and then a floor. But that is where it's like patient safety comes first.
Yes.
And you have to be able to have the confidence. So this is why we talk about in the beginning of communicating with each of the nurses, having that piece of paper and writing it down to say where they are, and then giving the numbers to say, like, okay, you're next up for an admission. Are you okay? And if you are okay, then what do I need to do to help you? So even if you do like one med pass for another nurse who seems to be drowning in some way, that goes a long way.
Totally does.
You know, so it's like doing those one little, hey, can I do your vital signs? You know, what do you need? So that's why I always say it's the biggest thing as being a charge nurse is checking in with everybody. And then, like you said earlier, that if your hospital offers a charge nurse class, I this is where we say development of your career is take that opportunity. And then 2, that is something you can write on your resume that you were a charge nurse, because that's development into your skills. 2, this is why we say we're here. So leave comments below. Don't forget to give this a thumbs up and like all this. And even if you don't, give it a thumbs down. We'll take all of it. But leave a comment below and ask us the questions, because no question is a stupid question kind of thing. And if you're not sure about something, it's okay, because we all were there at one point. I was that scared little nurse walking around and not sure what to do. And they would say, you know, fake it until you make it kind of comment. I don't know how many times you actually done that. Like walk in and you're like, I know what I'm talking about. And then when you walk out, you're like, oh my God, I don't even know what just happened. Because it's funny how I feel like we could write books of all the different things that we've dealt with.
Yes.
Very much so. Very much so. So it's like, I guess, what advice would you give to aspiring nurse to become a charged nurse overall, like the experiences, knowledge, and seeking, preparing for the role? Is there anything else you might want to add?
I would say, other than what we've already talked about, one of the things that I was grateful for is that I got to train as a charge nurse with another charge nurse who had a lot of experience, who I trusted and respected. Because at the end of the day, you can go to all these classes, you can do all these things, but you're not going to know how to do it and how you're going to react until you're in that situation. So if you can do that alongside someone who's experienced and you trust and respect, you're going to be so much better off.
Yes, I very much agree with that. And just watching, like, this is where I say ask the questions. Like, if you're not sure, like, watch the other nurses and ask them, hey, how do you handle this situation? What do you do in this? What do you do in that? And that's where I've learned to, like, write things down, because they'll turn around and be like, where am I? What's going on? And all the stuff. And I'd be like, I'm in the middle of something. I'm not sure. But if you have good organizational skills and you start to write things down, then you'll feel a little bit more prepared if something comes up, especially if an emergency happens. Because you as the charge nurse might be having to be like the recorder or something, being like, what's happening if there's a rapid response or a code blue. I always say, you say, get the code card, and like that's where you kind of learn to speak up and everything else. So, because everybody's going to look at you, because it's so funny when you're the charge nurse, it's like people look at you different, even though it's like you're the same person, you same thing, but you're the charge nurse. So it's like when conflicts happen, everybody just points and like walks away. It's that person.
Yeah. And I mean, we've talked about this before as a new nurse, and even as a very experienced nurse, it's definitely okay. It's actually very welcome to ask questions. So the same goes as the charge nurse. Just because maybe there's someone on the floor with more experience than you typically take turns as charge nurse. So you could be a somewhat new to the role and be working alongside someone who's done it a million times. And it's okay to go to that nurse and say, I'm new to being a charge nurse. I know you have more experience with this. What would you do in this situation? Do you mind talking about this with me? You
Yes.
know, they might really actually appreciate that you're coming to them for their wisdom. It's a compliment.
Oh
So
my God,
don't be
definitely.
afraid.
Definitely. I never realized it. It's funny. I was working on the floor for like, a while, just doing my thing. And then something happens and people are like, where are you? Where are you? Where are you? And I'm like, what? Wait, what? And I'm like, we have to ask you. We feel safer when you're here. Because we
Yeah.
know that things are gonna get done. And you're like, thank you. Like you
Yeah.
don't realize it until it's like you're missed or something happens and they're like, oh, I really wish you were here because you usually take control. Things were happening and you're the one who speaks up. And I was just like,
Yeah.
I don't know. And I go, that's just years of practice. And not even that as a person and saying that, hey, it's like I've learned with life experiences. So
Yeah.
being younger and not experiencing life, because it does get, sorry to say, it does get worse as you get older because you'll deal with medical stuff and then you'll deal with people and then you'll deal with children and then you'll deal with all this other stuff that comes in and then your parents getting older. So it's things, but I always say just like be patient with yourself
Yeah.
because you can't get everything at that moment. But
Exactly.
in time, like time will go by and then you'll look back and you'll be like, wow, I accomplished so much,
Yeah.
So I think this was good. I'm
Yeah.
happy that we had this conversation. I hope that any of you viewers are listening, that you got something out of it. And leave your comments below, and we'll see you next time. Bye, Ashley.
Bye.